At my wife's law school graduation, my wife announced, "I've decided to start a fresh life without you." Her new boyfriend was sitting with our friends. Everyone went quiet. I smiled and said, "Congratulations on your honesty." Before leaving, I handed her an envelope. When she opened it, she started screaming. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, apparently nobody told my wife that particular memo was supposed to apply to other people's disasters, not become the headline act of her own personal soap opera. But here we are, sitting in the San Diego Civic Center on what should have been one of the proudest days of our 28-year marriage, and I'm about to get front-row seats to the most spectacular public humiliation since Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction. The place is absolutely packed to the rafters with the usual graduation day suspects. Proud families clutching bouquets that probably cost more than my first car, kids running around in their Sunday best while their parents frantically chase them with wet wipes, and enough camera equipment to make a Hollywood film crew jealous. The air smells like a florist shop exploded, mixed with that particular brand of nervous excitement that only comes with major life milestones. You can practically taste the anticipation, thick as San Diego marine layer fog, that I'm sitting here in the third row, wearing this navy suit that Amelia picked out for me last week. "You need to look distinguished, Sam," she'd said, adjusting my tie like I was some kind of mannequin she was dressing up for display. "This is a big day for us." Yeah, well, turns out she wasn't kidding about that part, though I'm pretty sure we had different definitions of big day in mind. The whole ceremony has been dragging on for what feels like 17 hours, but is probably closer to 2. I've watched dozens of newly minted lawyers cross that stage, each one looking like they're about to conquer the world with their briefcases and student loan debt. Their families cheer like they've just won the lottery instead of signed up for decades of crushing financial obligation. But hey, who am I to rain on their parade? Then I hear it, Dr. Amelia Hart. And despite everything that's about to happen, despite all the red flags I've been ignoring for months like a colorblind matador, my chest still swells with pride. 28 years of marriage, 5 years of law school support, countless late nights of me bringing her coffee while she studied. And here she is, finally achieving her dream. Our dream, I thought. Silly me. She walks across that stage like she owns the place, cap and gown flowing behind her like she's some kind of academic superhero. The crowd applauds politely, cameras flash, and for a split second, I actually forget about all the weird behavior, the secretive phone calls, the sudden password changes on everything from Netflix to her laptop. For just a moment, I'm back to being the proud husband who sacrificed his own ambitions to help build hers. Then she does something that's definitely not in the standard graduation ceremony playbook. Instead of taking her diploma and walking off like every other graduate, she stops at the microphone, taps it twice to make sure it's working. The feedback screech makes everyone wince, and the ceremony coordinator looks like she's about to have a stroke. "I'd like to say something," Amelia announces, her voice carrying across the entire auditorium with crystal clarity. The crowd settles into that uncomfortable silence you get when someone's clearly about to go off script in a very public way. And then she drops the bomb that turns my entire world into ground zero. "Samuel," she says, looking directly at me with those green eyes that I fell in love with 3 decades ago, "I've decided to start a fresh life without you." The silence that follows is so complete you could hear a pin drop in the parking lot. Then the gasps start, a wave of shocked intake of breath that ripples through the crowd like a stadium wave of pure mortification. Someone in the back literally drops their glass, and the crash echoes through the auditorium like an exclamation point on the end of my marriage. I scan the crowd, partly out of shock and partly because my brain is trying to process what just happened. And that's when I see him. Gavin Brooks, sitting there in the 4th row with what can only be described as the smuggest expression I've ever seen on a human face. 25 years old, law school pretty boy, perfectly styled hair that probably requires more product than my wife uses, and wearing a suit that costs more than most people's rent. He's sitting with our friends, Mark and Julia from next door, Stephanie from Amelia's book club, people I've known for years, and he's not even trying to hide the self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face like butter on toast. Our so-called friends are all looking anywhere, but at me, suddenly finding the floor tiles absolutely fascinating. The body language tells the whole story. They all knew. Every single one of them knew what was coming, and not one of them had the decency to give me a heads up. Thanks for that, guys. Really feeling the love. But here's the thing about being publicly humiliated in front of 300 strangers and people you thought were your friends. You've got two choices. You can crumble like a stale cookie, or you can show them exactly what you're made of. I don't crack. I don't scream. I don't even flinch. Instead, I smile. Not one of those fake, plastic smiles you give the cashier at the grocery store, but a genuine, honest-to-goodness smile that comes from somewhere deep inside. Because suddenly, everything makes perfect sense. All those late-night study sessions with Gavin. All the secretive phone calls. All the times she came home looking like she'd just won the lottery while telling me she'd been buried in law books all day. I stand up slowly, straightening my jacket and nodding like she's just told me the weather forecast. The entire auditorium is watching me like I'm a live grenade that might explode at any second. Congratulations on your honesty, I say, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone that's still picking up everything. Finally, then I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out a manila envelope. Not just any manila envelope. This particular piece of office supplies has been my faithful companion for the past 3 months, ever since I started piecing together the truth about my wife's extracurricular activities. That I walk down the aisle toward the stage, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Every eye in the place is following me, but I keep my pace steady and calm, like I'm just going up to congratulate the graduate. Which, in a way, I am. When I reach her, she's standing there frozen like a deer in headlights, probably wondering what the hell I'm doing. The ceremony coordinator is frantically gesturing to security, but they're just as confused as everyone else about what exactly is happening here. I hand her the envelope with the kind of formal politeness you'd use when delivering someone's mail. Thought you might need this, I say quietly, just loud enough for the microphone to catch. Then I turn around and walk away. Not run, not storm off in a huff, just walk. Casual as Sunday morning, like I'm heading out to get the newspaper. Behind me, the whispers start up like a swarm of hornets that just got their nest kicked. I can hear fragments as I make my way to the exit. Did you see that? What was in the envelope? I can't believe she just... But I keep walking, my hand already reaching up to loosen this damn tie that's been choking me all morning, that I'm almost to the doors when I hear it. The sound that makes every step of the last 3 months of careful planning worth it. Amelia's voice, no longer amplified by the microphone, but carrying across the auditorium anyway, sharp with panic and rising toward hysteria. Samuel, what did you do? Samuel, but I don't turn around. I push through those double doors and step out into the California sunshine, finally loosening my tie and taking the first real breath I've had in months. The ocean breeze hits my face, carrying the smell of salt and freedom and new beginnings. Behind me, muffled by the closing doors, I hear one more sound that puts the perfect punctuation mark on this whole scene. Amelia's scream of rage and disbelief as she opens that envelope and finds exactly what I've been preparing for her these past few months. Divorce papers. Evidence of her affair. Financial documents. And most importantly, a copy of that prenup we signed 28 years ago that she apparently forgot about in all her careful planning. I stand there for a moment in the sunlight, breathing in the sweet air of vindication, and can't help but smile. Today really was a graduation day after all, just not the kind anyone was expecting. Let me back up and tell you who the hell I am, because context matters when you're watching someone's life implode in real time. My name is Samuel Price. I'm 56 years old, and until about 3 hours ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Turns out I was actually funding someone else's exit strategy, but we'll get to that delicious little detail in a minute. I spent most of my adult life as an IT consultant, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. I was the guy companies called when their servers crashed at 2 in the morning, the digital janitor who cleaned up other people's technological messes while they slept peacefully in their beds. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and it gave me something most people never achieve: stability. Real, honest-to-God stability. That I had a sweet little condo in Mission Hills with a view that didn't suck, a healthy savings account that would have made Dave Ramsey proud, and a 5-year plan that was actually working. I drove a reliable Honda that started every morning without drama, ate at the same 3 restaurants on rotation, and knew exactly how much money I'd have when I turned 65. I was living steady, predictable, and completely satisfied with my gloriously boring existence. Then I met Amelia Richardson at a coffee shop downtown, and everything went to hell in the most beautiful way possible. She was 28, I was 31, and she was sitting at a corner table surrounded by law school prep books like some kind of academic fortress. Her hair was this wild auburn mess that looked like she'd been running her hands through it for hours, and she had these intense green eyes that seemed to burn right through whatever she was reading. When she looked up and caught me staring like some kind of creepy stalker, instead of calling security, she smiled and asked if I knew anything about constitutional law. I didn't, but I sat down anyway. Within an hour, I learned that Amelia Richardson was pure, concentrated ambition wrapped up in a 5'6" package. She'd graduated from UC San Diego with a political science degree and dreams bigger than the California sky. Law school wasn't just a goal for her. It was a calling, a mission, her ticket to changing the world one case at a time. She talked about justice and equality and making a difference with the kind of passion that could power a small city. I was absolutely, completely, hopelessly smitten. We dated for 2 years, and I watched her work 3 part-time jobs while studying for the LSAT, surviving on coffee and determination and about 4 hours of sleep a night. She was magnificent and exhausting and completely broke, living in a studio apartment that was smaller than most people's closets and eating ramen noodles like they were a food group. When she got accepted to law school, I proposed. Not because I felt like I had to, but because I couldn't imagine a future that didn't include watching her conquer the legal world. She said yes while crying over her acceptance letter, and I thought I was the luckiest bastard in California. That's when I made the first of many financial decisions that seemed brilliant at the time and look absolutely insane in hindsight. I sold my condo, my beautiful, paid-off condo with the view and the equity and the stability, and used the money to pay for her first year of law school tuition. It's an investment in our future, I told myself, and I meant every word. Law school tuition, it turns out, is basically legalized robbery. Every semester, I watched another chunk of my savings disappear into the academic black hole, and every semester, I convinced myself it was worth it. Books, fees, living expenses, bar exam prep. It all added up to a number that would have made my accountant weep actual tears. So I worked more. A lot more. I took every contract that came my way, pulled all-nighters debugging code and fixing networks, said yes to weekend emergency calls that paid double time. While other guys my age were buying boats or taking vacations, I was building our future one billable hour at a time. And I was good at it. Really good. Turns out financial desperation is an excellent motivator for professional excellence. I became the IT consultant that companies specifically requested, the guy who could solve problems other people couldn't even identify. My rates went up, my reputation grew, and the money kept flowing toward Amelia's education like water toward a drain. But here's the thing about being married to someone in law school. You don't just become a husband. You become a one-man support system, a combination financier, tutor, therapist, and cheerleader all rolled into one exhausted package. I packed her lunches during exam weeks. Those brown bag meals filled with her favorite snacks and little encouraging notes that I thought were cute, but probably just reminded her that she was 30 years old and still getting packed lunches like a kindergartner. I drove her to late-night study groups in libraries across the city, waiting in parking lots for hours while she and her classmates argued about tort law and constitutional amendments. When she doubted herself, which happened more often than you'd expect from someone as naturally confident as Amelia, I was there with reassurance and perspective and whatever motivational speech seemed appropriate for the crisis of the moment. You're brilliant, I'd tell her when she was convinced she was going to fail the bar exam. You're going to change the world, I'd say when she felt overwhelmed by the competition, and I believed every word of it. I believed in her intelligence, her drive, her potential to make a real difference in the world. I believed that all the sacrifices were building something beautiful and permanent and worthwhile. Every time I said no to something I wanted, a new car, a vacation, a hobby that cost more than $20, I reminded myself that I was investing in our future. Every time I worked late or took on an extra project or skipped hanging out with friends because we couldn't afford it, I told myself that this was temporary. This was the foundation we were building together. Years of overtime became her undergraduate degree, then her law school tuition, then her bar exam fees, then her professional wardrobe, then her networking events, then her continuing education courses. Each milestone felt like progress towards something bigger, something that would justify all the sacrifice and hard work and delayed gratification. I was the invisible partner in her success story, the guy who made it all possible while staying quietly in the background. And I was proud of that role, genuinely proud. I thought we were a team, working towards shared goals with complementary skills and mutual support. Looking back now, I can see exactly where I went wrong. I thought I was building our foundation when I was actually just building her escape route. Every dollar I invested in her education, every hour I spent supporting her dreams, every sacrifice I made for our supposed future together, I was basically funding my own obsolescence. She wasn't using my support to build our life together. She was using it to build her way out. And the really beautiful part? She did it so gradually, so naturally, that I never saw it coming until it was way too late to do anything about it except watch the demolition. You'd think after 28 years of marriage, you'd notice when your wife starts acting like a completely different person. You'd think all those little changes would add up to one big, flashing neon sign that says, "Houston, we have a problem." But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks and dramatic music. It creeps in like carbon monoxide, odorless and invisible until you're already poisoned. The changes started about 3 months before graduation, right around the time Amelia began her final semester. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Law school had been a marathon, and she was finally approaching the finish line. Of course she'd be acting weird. She was probably just anxious about the bar exam, worried about job prospects, maybe having some kind of quarter-life crisis at 34. Except this wasn't stress behavior. This was something else entirely. It started with conversation, or rather, the complete absence of it. Amelia had always been a talker, the kind of person who could turn a trip to the grocery store into a 20-minute story complete with character analysis of the cashier and commentary on the social implications of the cereal aisle layout. Suddenly, I was getting one-word answers to everything. How was school today? Fine. What did you study? Stuff. Want to grab dinner? Whatever. It was like living with a teenager, except teenagers usually have the decency to slam doors and stomp around, so you know they're pissed about something. Amelia just became this polite, distant stranger who happened to share my bed and my Netflix password. Speaking of Netflix, that became password number 1 in what I now recognize as the great password revolution of our marriage. One day I went to log in and watch some mindless documentary about serial killers. Don't judge me. Everyone needs a hobby. And suddenly, I needed a password. When I asked Amelia about it, she gave me this look like I'd asked for the nuclear launch codes. "Oh, I changed it for security reasons," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "You know how these streaming services get hacked all the time, right? Because clearly, the international hackers were dying to break into our account and steal our viewing history of cooking shows and true crime documentaries." But I let it slide, because picking a fight over Netflix seemed petty, even for me. Then it was her phone. Amelia had never been secretive about her phone before. It usually sat on the counter while she cooked, face up and unlocked, buzzing with text messages from study groups and reminders about assignments. Suddenly, it was glued to her hand like some kind of electronic appendage, always face down, always locked, always just out of reach. She started taking it with her everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Bathroom trips that used to take 2 minutes now lasted 15. Showers became extended spa experiences where she'd emerge looking refreshed and immediately reach for her phone like she was checking the stock market or waiting for news about a national emergency. The laptop got the same treatment. For 5 years, I'd been her unofficial tech support, helping her format papers and troubleshoot printer issues and explain why her computer was running slowly, usually because she had 47 browser tabs open simultaneously. Suddenly, passwords appeared on everything: her laptop, her tablet, even her email accounts that I'd helped her set up in the first place. "Privacy is important," she explained when I mentioned the sudden Fort Knox level of digital security. "Everyone says lawyers need to be extra careful about electronic security." Sure, because every first-year law student is clearly dealing with state secrets and classified information that requires CI-level protection protocols. But the real kicker was the schedule changes. For 3 years, we'd had date nights every Friday. Nothing fancy, dinner at our usual spots, maybe a movie, sometimes just a long walk around the neighborhood followed by wine and conversation on the couch. It was our thing, our weekly check-in with each other, our reminder that we were still a couple despite the chaos of law school. Suddenly, Friday nights were study group nights. Every single Friday, without exception. "I'm sorry, honey," she'd say, applying makeup that seemed awfully elaborate for sitting in a library with a bunch of stressed-out law students. "This constitutional law class is kicking everyone's ass. We really need these group sessions to get through it." Funny thing about these study groups, they all seem to require full makeup, carefully coordinated outfits, and perfume. Lots of perfume. Because nothing says serious academic discussion, like smelling like a department store cosmetics counter. She'd leave around 7, dressed like she was going on a date, and come home around midnight, looking refreshed. Not tired like someone who'd been hunched over law books for 5 hours. Not stressed like someone wrestling with complex legal concepts. She looked glowing, satisfied, like someone who'd just had a really good time. Our friends started acting weird too. Mark and Julia next door, who used to invite us over for barbecues and game nights, suddenly got very busy whenever I suggested hanging out. Stephanie from the book club, who used to chat with me for 20 minutes whenever she picked Amelia up for their monthly meetings, started giving me these awkward, pitying looks and cutting conversations short. They'd all go quiet when I walked into a room, like they'd been discussing something they didn't want me to hear. Conversations would die mid-sentence, followed by uncomfortable silence and sudden intense interest in their drinks or their phones or the fascinating patterns in my living room carpet. I felt like I was living in some kind of parallel universe where everyone knew something I didn't, like being the only person who didn't get the memo about the surprise party or the dress code change. Except instead of feeling left out, I felt like I was slowly going insane. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in February. Amelia had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion from another brutal study session, and left her iPad on the kitchen counter, just sitting there, unlocked, like a gift from the gods of marital detective work. That I told myself I was just going to check the weather, maybe browse some news articles. Definitely not snoop through my wife's personal messages like some kind of paranoid stalker. But curiosity has a way of overriding good intentions, especially when you've been feeling like a stranger in your own marriage for months. That's when I found them. Messages between Amelia and someone named Gavin Brooks. Messages that made my blood run cold and my hands shake and my entire world tilt sideways like a carnival ride gone wrong. Flirty messages. Planning messages. Hotel reservation confirmations. And worst of all, messages where they laughed about me like I was some kind of joke they shared, some pathetic figure they were deceiving for their own entertainment. "He has no idea," one message read. "Just a little longer, and we'll be free." Another one. "Poor Sam. He's so trusting. Almost feel bad for him. Almost." And my personal favorite. "Can't wait to see his face when he finds out. Think he'll cry." I sat there in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, reading evidence of my wife's betrayal on her own device, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Not angry. Anger would come later. Not hurt. That would hit me in waves over the following weeks. Just quiet. Like the moment right before a storm when all the birds stop singing and the air goes still. That's when I realized that betrayal isn't a sudden storm that hits without warning. It's a slow, careful flood that rises inch by inch until you're drowning in your own living room. You know what they don't teach you in those self-help books about surviving infidelity? They don't tell you that the moment you discover your spouse is cheating, you have about 30 seconds to make a decision that will determine whether you end up as the victim or the victor in this little drama. Most people choose poorly. They scream, they cry, they confront, they throw things, they post angry Facebook rants that their friends screenshot and share for years afterward. Dummy. I chose patience and documentation. Lots and lots of documentation. That night, sitting in my kitchen staring at my wife's iPad like it had just revealed the secrets of the universe, I made a decision that probably saved my financial ass and what was left of my dignity. Instead of marching upstairs and confronting Amelia with the evidence like some kind of righteous warrior, I did something much more dangerous. I started taking screenshots. Every message, every photo, every hotel confirmation and restaurant receipt, and cute little inside joke at my expense. I copied it all, saved it to a cloud account she didn't know existed, and then very carefully put her iPad back exactly where I'd found it. Then I went to bed and lay there next to my cheating wife, listening to her breathe, and started planning. The next morning, I called in a personal day and drove downtown to meet with James Herrera, a divorce attorney whose name I'd gotten from a guy at work who'd been through his own marital apocalypse a few years back. He's expensive, Tony had warned me, but he's absolutely ruthless when it comes to protecting his clients. If you want to walk away with your dignity and your bank account intact, James is your guy. James Herrera's office looks exactly like what you'd expect from a lawyer who specializes in high-stakes divorces. Lots of dark wood, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and law books arranged with the kind of precision that suggests someone who doesn't leave anything to chance. The man himself was probably in his early 50s, perfectly groomed in that way that screams, "I bill $400 an hour, and I'm worth every penny." I walked in there expecting to tell my sob story to someone who'd heard it all before and would pat me on the head and send me home with a pamphlet about the stages of grief. Instead, I found myself face to face with a legal predator who smelled blood in the water and liked what he was smelling. "Show me everything," was the first thing he said after I gave him the basic outline of my situation. No sympathy, no platitudes about how sorry he was for my pain, just a professional assessment of my ammunition. I liked him immediately that we spent the next 3 hours going through 5 years of financial records with the kind of thoroughness that would make an IRS auditor proud. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, insurance policies. Everything I could think of that might be relevant to understanding exactly how much money I'd poured into Amelia's education and career development. That's when James found the first surprise. Hidden bank accounts under Amelia's maiden name. Accounts I'd never heard of or seen statements for. Accounts that showed regular deposits timed to coincide with what I thought were grocery runs or study materials purchases. She'd been skimming money for months, maybe years, building her own little nest egg while I was working overtime to pay for her law school expenses. "Smart girl," James said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "She's been planning this exit strategy for a while. Good thing you found out when you did." But here's where Amelia's cleverness ran into a brick wall of my own paranoia from 28 years ago. When we got married, I'd insisted on a prenup. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I'd watched too many of my friends get cleaned out in divorces, and I wasn't about to let that happen to me. Amelia had fought it at first, claiming it showed I didn't really believe in our marriage, but I'd held firm. "It's just business," I told her. "If we never need it, great. If we do need it, we'll both be glad we have it." The prenup was ironclad. Everything I'd earned before the marriage stayed mine. Everything I'd inherited stayed mine. And most importantly, there was a clause about infidelity that basically said if either of us cheated, the cheater got nothing. Not a dime of alimony, not a share of assets, nothing. "This is beautiful work," James said, reading through the document like it was poetry. "Whoever wrote this really knew what they were doing. The infidelity clause alone is going to save you probably 6 figures in alimony payments." That would be me who wrote it, actually. 28 years ago, I was young and paranoid and smart enough to hire a really good lawyer to protect my interests. Present day me wanted to go back in time and buy past me a very expensive bottle of whiskey. But documentation was only half the battle. If I was going to do this right, I needed more than screenshots of text messages and bank statements. I needed the kind of evidence that would hold up in court and leave no room for Amelia to spin some story about how I was a paranoid husband who'd misunderstood innocent communications. That's when James introduced me to Tony Marchetti, a private investigator who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1940s noir film. Tony was probably 60, with gray hair and sharp eyes and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything at least twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Cheating spouses are my specialty," he told me with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this for 30 years. "They always think they're smarter than they are, and they always make mistakes. Your wife and her boyfriend are going to give me everything I need to bury them in court." So while I continued my Oscar-worthy performance as the clueless husband, Tony went to work. He followed them to restaurants, to hotels, to cozy little coffee shops where they planned their future together. He took photos, collected receipts, interviewed hotel staff who remembered the young couple who always paid in cash and never stayed more than a few hours. Meanwhile, I installed a small camera in our home office, hidden behind some books where Amelia often took her private study calls. The camera captured video calls with Gavin where they discussed their plans for our house and laughed about how easy Sam will fold when he finds out. That last part particularly amused me. Easy Sam. Poor, trusting, naive Sam who would just roll over and accept his fate like a good little victim. Every morning, I'd wake up, make Amelia coffee, ask about her day, kiss her goodbye like nothing had changed. Every evening, I'd ask about her classes, listen to her stories about professors and classmates, smile and nod like the supportive husband I'd always been. And every night, after she went to bed, I'd review the day's intelligence with James and Tony, building our case piece by piece like we were planning the D-Day invasion. This is going to be a massacre, James told me after reviewing Tony's latest batch of evidence. Your wife thinks she's playing chess, but you're playing three-dimensional chess while she's still figuring out which pieces move where. The beautiful thing about watching someone plan your destruction is that they have no idea you're watching them do it. They get sloppy, overconfident, careless with details. They start believing their own lies and forgetting to cover their tracks. Amelia thought she was the director of this little drama, carefully orchestrating her exit strategy while keeping me in the dark about her real intentions. Truth is, I was directing the whole damn play, and she was just another actor who didn't know the script had changed. The morning of graduation day, I woke up at 5:30 feeling like a kid on Christmas morning. Not because I was excited about celebrating my wife's academic achievement, though there was a tiny part of me that still felt proud of what she'd accomplished, despite everything. But because I was about to watch the most elaborate house of cards in history come tumbling down in spectacular fashion. Amelia was already awake, standing in front of our bedroom mirror in her cap and gown, adjusting everything for the 100th time and taking selfies like she was preparing for a magazine shoot. She looked absolutely radiant, glowing with that particular brand of confidence that comes from thinking you're about to get away with the perfect crime. Today's the day, she said, catching my eye in the mirror. New beginnings, right? Absolutely. I replied, and I meant every word, just not in the way she was thinking. She spent the next hour getting ready with the kind of meticulous attention to detail usually reserved for red carpet events. Hair perfectly styled, makeup applied with surgical precision, even her graduation cap positioned at exactly the right angle to look both scholarly and photogenic. She kept checking her phone, probably coordinating with Gavin about their post-ceremony celebration plans, that I made her coffee and toast, the same breakfast I'd been making her for 5 years of law school mornings, and watched her post photo after photo to social media with captions like, "Dreams coming true," and "Ready for my new beginning." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. "You look beautiful," I told her as she headed for the door, and that wasn't a lie either. She did look beautiful. Too bad beautiful doesn't mean trustworthy. I kissed her cheek, smiled warmly, and said, "You'll remember this day forever." She laughed, thinking I was just being supportive and sentimental. "I hope so. It's going to be perfect." "Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea how right you are." I took my time getting ready, choosing my clothes carefully, the navy suit she'd picked out, because I wanted to look the part of the proud, devoted husband right up until the moment I stopped playing that role. I even wore the tie she'd bought me for Christmas, the one with the little scales of justice pattern that she thought was so clever. The manila envelope sat on my dresser where it had been waiting for this moment for 2 weeks. James had assembled what he called the nuclear file. Copies of the prenup, the divorce papers, photographic evidence of the affair, financial records showing the hidden accounts, sworn statements from hotel staff, and a detailed timeline of Amelia's deception that read like a masterclass in betrayal. This is enough evidence to convict her in criminal court, let alone family court, James had told me when he handed it over. She's not going to have any room to maneuver once this goes public. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and headed out to what I knew would be the most satisfying morning of my adult life. The ceremony itself was everything you'd expect from a law school graduation. Long, pompous, filled with speeches about justice and integrity and the sacred duty of the legal profession. I sat there listening to deans and distinguished alumni talk about honor and ethics while my wife sat 3 rows away, planning to abandon her marriage for a 25-year-old with good hair and flexible morals. When they started calling names for the diploma presentation, my heart rate picked up, not from nerves, but from anticipation. I'd been planning this moment for months, running through it in my head like a quarterback visualizing the perfect pass. Everything had to be timed perfectly, executed flawlessly, delivered with exactly the right amount of calm dignity. Dr. Amelia Hart, Showtime. I watched her walk across that stage like she owned the world, and for a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. She had no idea what was coming. In her mind, she was about to graduate, dump her boring older husband, and ride off into the sunset with her young boyfriend, supported by the money she'd been secretly stashing away and the alimony she thought she'd get from our divorce. Instead, she was about to discover that sometimes the person you think you're playing is actually 3 moves ahead of you. Then she did the one thing I hadn't planned for. She went off script. Instead of taking her diploma and walking off like every other graduate, she stopped at the microphone. The feedback screech made everyone wince, and I saw the ceremony coordinator start to panic in my peripheral vision. "I'd like to say something," she announced, and I thought, oh, this is even better than I hoped. Because here's the thing about public betrayal. When someone humiliates you in front of hundreds of people, your response becomes part of the public record. Everyone remembers not just what was done to you, but how you handled it. And I'd been practicing my response for weeks. "Samuel, I've decided to start a fresh life without you." The gasps that rippled through the auditorium were music to my ears. This was better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. She'd just publicly announced her betrayal in front of 300 witnesses, including judges, lawyers, and law professors who would remember this moment for years. That I took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a hurt smile, but the genuine smile of someone who's about to play the winning hand in a very long poker game. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silence. Finally, the walk down the aisle felt like the longest and shortest walk of my life. Every eye in the place was on me, but I kept my pace steady and calm. When I reached the stage, Amelia was standing there frozen, probably wondering what the hell I was doing. That I handed her the envelope with the kind of formal politeness you'd use when serving legal papers, which, technically, I was. "Thought you might need this," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked away, loosening my tie as I went. Behind me, I could hear the whispers starting, that electric buzz of 300 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. That I was almost to the exit when I heard the sound I'd been waiting months to hear. Amelia's voice, sharp with panic and confusion, calling my name like she could somehow undo what had just happened, but I didn't turn around. I pushed through those doors and stepped into the California sunshine, breathing in the sweet air of freedom and vindication. Behind me, muffled by the closing doors, came the sound that made every moment of planning and patience worth it. Amelia's scream of rage and disbelief as she opened that envelope and discovered that her perfect plan had just become her perfect nightmare. That I stood there in the parking lot for a moment, enjoying the sunshine and the silence and the knowledge that somewhere behind me, the woman who thought she was so clever was learning exactly how expensive betrayal could be. Then I got in my car, drove straight to O'Malley's pub, ordered a bourbon, and waited for my phone to start ringing. You know what's beautiful about a well-executed plan? It's not just the moment of impact. Though that graduation ceremony mic drop was pretty damn satisfying, it's watching all the carefully arranged dominoes fall in perfect sequence afterward. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It's like a house built on quicksand. Once the foundation starts shifting, everything comes down fast. That I was sitting at O'Malley's pub, nursing my second bourbon and watching ESPN on the big screen, when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. The first call was from Mark, my next-door neighbor, probably wondering what the hell had just happened at graduation. I let it go to voicemail. The second call was from Julia, Mark's wife. Also ignored. The third call was from a number I didn't recognize, but I had a pretty good idea who it might be. By the time my phone rang for the fourth time, I was starting to enjoy myself. There's something deeply satisfying about being completely unreachable when people desperately need to reach you, especially when those people have spent months lying to your face and participating in your public humiliation. Around 6 o'clock, when I was contemplating whether to order food or just make bourbon my dinner, Serena Martinez called. Serena was Amelia's oldest friend, someone I'd known since college, and unlike our other so-called friends, she'd never been part of the conspiracy. If anyone was going to give me the straight story about the aftermath, it would be her. "Sam," she said when I answered, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Jesus Christ, what did you do to her?" "Nothing she didn't do to herself," I replied, signaling the bartender for another drink. "I just provided some clarity to the situation." She's been calling me for 3 hours, hysterical. She's saying you ruined everything, that you destroyed her life out of spite. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. Funny how quickly starting a fresh life becomes destroying her life when reality sets in. What exactly did I ruin, Serena? Her plan to take my money and run off with her boyfriend. There was a long pause. You knew about Gavin? I've known about Gavin for months. I've also known about the secret bank accounts, the hotel receipts, and the charming text messages where they both laughed about what an easy mark I was going to be. Oh shit. Yeah, oh shit. So tell me, what's the current situation over there in paradise? Serena sighed heavily. It's a mess, Sam. A complete disaster. Apparently, Amelia had been telling Gavin that the divorce was going to be amicable, that you'd agreed to give her the house and a generous settlement. She'd been making promises about their future together based on money she thought she was going to get from you. This was even better than I'd hoped. And now he's freaking out because his dreams of playing house in Mission Hills just evaporated. The bank accounts are frozen. How did you manage that so fast? Turns out when you have documented evidence of financial fraud, judges move pretty quickly on asset protection orders. Amazing how the legal system works when you actually follow the rules. The fancy loft they were renting together? Rent bounced this morning because it was coming out of one of those frozen accounts. And his BMW. Apparently that lease payment bounced too. I had to admit, I hadn't expected the financial dominoes to fall quite this quickly, but I wasn't complaining. How's our boy Gavin handling the pressure? About as well as you'd expect a 25-year-old law student to handle having his sugar mama's money supply cut off overnight. He lasted exactly 48 hours before he packed his shit and disappeared. That stopped me mid-sip. He left her. Oh, it gets better. He didn't just leave. He left her a note. A fucking note. Sam, like they were in high school. Apparently, it said something about how this isn't what he signed up for, and he needed to focus on his career without distractions. I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. Real, genuine, belly-deep laughter that probably made me look insane to the other bar patrons, but I didn't care. So let me get this straight. Prince Charming was perfectly fine with breaking up my marriage and spending my money, but the moment his meal ticket got canceled, he turned into a marathon runner. Pretty much. And now Amelia's calling everyone she knows, trying to get loans to cover her expenses. Most people are declining, probably because they don't want to get involved in whatever legal nightmare is coming next. The beautiful thing about social circles is that they're built on reputation and perception. When someone publicly implodes the way Amelia had at graduation, people start distancing themselves faster than you can say guilty by association. Nobody wants to be associated with the woman who announced her affair at her own graduation ceremony. What about her other friends? The ones who knew what was happening and decided not to mention it to me? Mark and Julia have been avoiding everyone. I think they're embarrassed about being part of the whole thing. Stephanie from book club is apparently telling people she suspected something but didn't want to get involved. Everyone's basically pretending they had no idea what was going on. Of course they were. Now that the affair was public and messy, suddenly nobody wanted to admit they'd been enablers and accomplices. It's amazing how quickly people develop amnesia when their friend's criminal behavior becomes a liability. How's she explaining the divorce papers? Still claiming I'm the villain in this story? She's trying to, but it's not working. Hard to play the victim when there are photos of you checking into hotels with your boyfriend. Plus, apparently, some of the law professors were at the graduation. Words already spreading through the legal community about what happened. That was an angle I hadn't fully considered, but it made perfect sense. The San Diego legal community was smaller than people realized, and reputation was everything in that world. Judges talked to lawyers, lawyers talked to professors, professors talked to students. By next week, everyone in the local legal scene would know exactly what Amelia Hart had done and how it had blown up in her face. Is she still planning to take the bar exam? As far as I know, but I'm not sure how much good it's going to do her. A couple of firms that were supposedly interested in interviewing her have already canceled. Apparently, being known as the woman who announced her affair at her own graduation ceremony isn't the kind of publicity law firms are looking for. I finished my bourbon and contemplated the beautiful symmetry of it all. Amelia had spent 5 years building her reputation in the legal community, networking with professors and classmates, positioning herself for a successful career. and she destroyed all of it in about 30 seconds at a microphone, thinking she was making some kind of grand gesture of independence. Serena, can I ask you something? Sure. Did you know? About the affair, I mean. Another long pause. I suspected something was going on, but I didn't know for sure until today. And honestly, Sam, even if I had known, I'm not sure I would have told you. It's not my place to get involved in other people's marriages. I appreciate the honesty. For what it's worth, I think she's an idiot. You were a good husband to her, and she threw it away for some kid who ran the moment things got complicated. Yeah, well, sometimes people show you exactly who they are when they think nobody's watching. I just made sure everybody was watching when she did it. After I hung up with Serena, I sat there in the quiet of O'Malley's, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of ESPN and casual conversation, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The dominoes were falling exactly as they should, and I didn't have to do anything but watch gravity do its work. 3 weeks after the graduation ceremony heard round San Diego, I found myself sitting in Family Court 3B, wearing my best suit and feeling like a man who'd just discovered he'd been playing poker with a bunch of amateurs for the past 28 years. The courtroom had that particular institutional smell, industrial disinfectant mixed with fear, desperation, and the lingering aroma of broken dreams. It was strangely comforting. Across the aisle, Amelia sat next to her attorney, Victoria Sterling, looking like she'd aged about 5 years in 3 weeks. Gone was the radiant confidence of graduation day, replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd just watched their carefully constructed fantasy world collapse in real time. She kept glancing at me with this mixture of rage and disbelief, like she couldn't quite figure out how her foolproof plan had turned into a complete disaster. Victoria Sterling was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end divorce attorney. Perfectly tailored suit, briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and the kind of predatory smile that suggested she ate opposing counsel for breakfast and picked her teeth with their bones. She was expensive, aggressive, and had a reputation for getting her clients every penny they thought they deserved, plus interest. Too bad for Amelia that wanting something and being legally entitled to it are two completely different things. James Herrera sat beside me, looking like a man who was about to enjoy himself immensely. He'd spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment with the thoroughness of a surgeon planning a particularly delicate operation. His briefcase contained what he cheerfully dubbed the nuclear option, enough evidence to turn Amelia's divorce dreams into a legal nightmare. Remember, he'd told me that morning over coffee, just sit there and look like the wronged husband. Don't gloat, don't smirk, don't give them any ammunition to use against you. Let the evidence speak for itself. Good advice, though I had to admit that sitting there without smirking was going to be a challenge. Judge Patricia Hernandez took the bench at exactly 9 a.m., and I could see why James had been so confident about drawing her for this case. Judge Hernandez had a reputation as a no-nonsense jurist who'd seen every sob story, every manipulation tactic, and every legal loophole that desperate divorcing spouses could dream up. She was in her early 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of piercing gaze that suggested she could spot bullshit from orbit. "This is a dissolution of marriage proceeding," she announced, scanning the paperwork in front of her. "Hart versus Price. I understand there are some contested issues regarding spousal support and asset division." Victoria Sterling stood up first, smoothing her skirt and putting on her most sympathetic expression. "Your Honor, my client, Dr. Amelia Hart, has sacrificed 5 years of her life and career potential to complete her legal education. During this time, she was entirely financially dependent on her husband, who encouraged and supported her educational pursuits. She's now entering the job market at 34, significantly behind her peers in terms of career development and earning potential." She paused for dramatic effect, probably waiting for the judge to start reaching for the tissues. Dr. Hart respectfully requests spousal support to help her establish herself professionally, as well as her fair share of the marital assets that were accumulated during their 28-year marriage. She's not asking for anything unreasonable, simply what any spouse would be entitled to after nearly 3 decades of marriage and partnership. It was a good performance. I had to give her that. If you didn't know the full story, you might actually feel sorry for poor Amelia. The devoted wife who'd sacrificed everything for her education only to be cast aside by her cruel husband just as she was about to start her career. Unfortunately for Victoria, Judge Hernandez was about to get the full story. James stood up with the kind of calm confidence that comes from holding all the winning cards. Your Honor, my client Samuel Price agrees that this has been a long marriage, and that he did indeed support his wife's education. However, there are several critical factors that need to be considered in this case. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. First, there's the matter of the prenuptial agreement that both parties signed willingly 28 years ago. I watched Amelia's face as James handed copies to the court clerk. She'd probably forgotten about that prenup, or maybe she'd convinced herself it wouldn't hold up after all these years. Judging by the way her attorney's expression shifted from confident to concerned, they hadn't done their homework on that particular document. Your Honor, James continued, this prenuptial agreement specifically addresses the issue of spousal support in the event of marital misconduct. According to Section 7, subsection C, any spouse who commits adultery during the marriage forfeits all rights to spousal support and is entitled only to assets they brought into the marriage or acquired independently. Judge Hernandez was reading through the prenup with the kind of attention that suggested she was impressed by the thoroughness of the document. This appears to be properly executed and notarized. Mrs. Sterling, do you have any objection to the validity of this agreement? Victoria Sterling looked like she'd just swallowed something unpleasant. Your Honor, we weren't aware that adultery was being alleged in this case. Oh, but it is, James said with what I can only describe as barely contained glee. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. What followed was 20 minutes of the most thorough character assassination I'd ever witnessed, and I was just a spectator. James methodically walked through the evidence: hotel receipts, text messages, photographs, sworn statements from hotel staff, bank records showing the secret accounts, and the timeline that showed Amelia had been planning her exit strategy for months. The piece de resistance was the recording from our home office, where Amelia and Gavin discussed their plans for our house and laughed about how easy Sam will fold. Judge Hernandez listened to that recording with the kind of expression that suggested she was mentally calculating exactly how much trouble Amelia was in. Your Honor, Victoria Sterling said desperately, even if adultery did occur, the prenuptial agreement is nearly 3 decades old. Surely the court has discretion to. The prenuptial agreement, Judge Hernandez interrupted, includes a specific clause stating that it remains in full effect regardless of the length of the marriage. It also includes an annual review provision that both parties acknowledged and waived every year for 28 years. She looked directly at Amelia. Mrs. Hart, you signed a waiver as recently as last January acknowledging the continued validity of this agreement. I remembered that waiver. It had been part of our annual tax preparation routine for years. Just another piece of paperwork that Amelia signed without really reading, probably because she never thought she'd need to worry about it. Judge Hernandez set down the prenup and picked up the evidence folder. Furthermore, the evidence presented shows a clear pattern of financial deception and marital misconduct. The defendant established secret accounts, misrepresented expenses, and engaged in a long-term extramarital relationship while being financially supported by the plaintiff. She looked up at Amelia with the kind of expression that made it clear the sympathy well had run completely dry. This court does not reward deception and betrayal. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Mrs. Hart is entitled to no spousal support. Mr. Price retains all assets acquired during the marriage, as specified in the agreement. The marital residence remains in Mr. Price's sole ownership, as it was never transferred to joint ownership. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. The prenuptial agreement stands. Motion for spousal support is denied. Mr. Price is awarded his requested relief. I watched Amelia's face crumble as 28 years of marriage and 5 years of law school planning turned into exactly nothing. Victoria Sterling was already whispering about appeals, but we both knew there was no appeal from stupidity. For 28 years, Amelia thought she'd outgrow me, that she'd eventually become successful enough to not need me anymore. Instead, she'd just outgrown her luck. Here's something they don't teach you in law school. The legal profession is basically a small town wearing a fancy suit. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone talks to everyone. and nothing stays secret for longer than it takes to brew a pot of coffee. Amelia was about to learn this lesson the hard way, and I had front-row seats to what was shaping up to be the most spectacular professional self-destruction in San Diego legal history. The first domino fell exactly 4 days after our court hearing. My buddy Rick Gonzalez, who sells legal software to law firms across Southern California, called me up laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "Sam, you're not going to believe this," he wheezed between fits of laughter. "I was at Morrison & Associates yesterday, installing their new case management system, when I overheard the partners talking about some new graduate who'd completely torched her reputation before she even took the bar exam." "Really?" I said, settling back in my chair with my coffee. "What happened?" "Apparently, this woman announced her affair at her own graduation ceremony, got divorced 3 weeks later, and lost everything because of a prenup. But here's the best part. Her boyfriend was bragging about the whole thing to his classmates before it all went to hell." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Bragging?" "Yeah. Apparently this kid Gavin was telling everyone at law school how he was going to upgrade from his dingy student apartment to a house in Mission Hills, courtesy of his sugar mama's divorce settlement. He was practically taking orders for housewarming party invitations. The image of Gavin bragging about his plan to steal my house and my money was so absurd I had to laugh. And his classmates just listened to this. Oh, it gets better. One of his study group partners was the nephew of Judge Patricia Hernandez. You know, the judge who heard your case? Kid went home and told his uncle about this classmate who was bragging about profiting from breaking up someone's marriage. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So Judge Hernandez hadn't just been dealing with our case in a vacuum. She'd been hearing about Gavin's bragging from her own family. No wonder she'd looked like she wanted to throw the book at Amelia during the hearing. "The whole law school knows about it now," Rick continued. "Professors are using it as a cautionary tale about professional ethics. I heard one of the instructors telling his students that this is exactly the kind of behavior that'll get you disbarred before you even get barred." Over the next few weeks, the story spread through the San Diego legal community like wildfire in August. Every time I thought it had reached its maximum distribution, someone new would call with another chapter in the ongoing saga of Amelia's professional suicide. Tony Marchetti, my private investigator, heard it from a court clerk who'd witnessed our hearing. The clerk had apparently gone home and told her husband, who worked as a paralegal at one of the big downtown firms, who told his boss, who mentioned it at a partner meeting. Within a week, half the law firms in the city knew about the woman who'd announced her affair at graduation and lost everything in divorce court. It's like watching a really slow-motion car crash, Tony told me over beers at O'Malley's. Every day, the story gets a little more detailed, and her reputation gets a little more destroyed. The story had evolved in the telling, as stories do. By the time it made the rounds through the legal gossip network, Amelia had become a cautionary tale about greed, betrayal, and the dangers of underestimating your spouse. Some versions had her stealing money from client accounts. Not true, but entertaining. Others had her planning to frame me for domestic violence to get a better settlement. Also not true, but it added drama. The truth was damaging enough, but the embellished versions were career-killing. Meanwhile, Gavin's reputation was undergoing its own spectacular collapse. His residency director at the law clinic where he worked part-time pulled him aside for what Rick heard was a very serious conversation about professional ethics and the appearance of impropriety. Apparently, bragging about profiting from adultery wasn't the kind of character reference that impressed potential employers. "The kid's basically radioactive now," Rick told me. "Nobody wants to hire someone who's known for breaking up marriages for money. Firms are worried about liability, about what their clients might think if they found out their lawyer was famous for being a homewrecker." The irony was delicious. Gavin had thought he was so clever, latching onto an older woman with resources and plans. Instead, he'd attached himself to a sinking ship and managed to torpedo his own career in the process. But Amelia's situation was even worse. While Gavin was just a law student who could potentially rebuild his reputation over time, Amelia was a newly minted lawyer trying to enter a profession that valued reputation above almost everything else. And her reputation was now synonymous with professional suicide. The prestigious clerkship she'd been counting on suddenly evaporated. The judge who'd been considering her for the position apparently heard the story at a judicial conference and decided he didn't need that kind of drama in his chambers. Law firms that had shown interest during her final semester stopped returning her calls. She's applying everywhere, Serena told me during one of our periodic updates. Big firms, small firms, solo practitioners, legal aid organizations. Nobody wants to touch her. What's she telling them about the gaps in her resume? She's trying to spin it as taking time to study for the bar exam and deal with a difficult divorce. But the legal community here is too small, Sam. Everyone knows what really happened. The bar exam itself became another source of professional humiliation. Amelia took it, of course. She'd worked too hard to get to that point to give up now. But even passing wouldn't solve her fundamental problem. Bar passage just gave you permission to practice law. It didn't give you anyone willing to hire you. Legal conferences became minefields for Amelia. The story had spread beyond San Diego to the broader California legal community, turning her into a cautionary tale that law professors shared with their students about the importance of professional ethics and personal integrity. I was at a continuing education seminar last week, James Herrera told me, and one of the speakers used your ex-wife's case as an example of how personal misconduct can destroy a legal career before it even starts. He didn't use her name, but everyone in the room knew exactly who he was talking about. The California Bar Association's character and fitness review, required for all new attorneys, became another hurdle. While adultery itself wasn't grounds for bar admission denial, the pattern of deception, financial fraud, and public misconduct raised questions about Amelia's fitness to practice law. They're not going to deny her admission, James explained, but they're definitely going to make her sweat for it. And every employer who runs a background check is going to see that she required additional character review. Meanwhile, I was discovering that being the wronged party in a spectacular public divorce had its own strange social benefits. Other men who'd been through similar situations started reaching out, asking for advice about protecting themselves. Divorce attorneys began referring clients to me for consultations about financial planning and evidence gathering. You've become something of a folk hero, Tony laughed. The guy who outplayed the player and came out ahead. The legal community's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of my position. Lawyers, it turns out, really don't like it when people make their profession look bad through public displays of unethical behavior. Amelia hadn't just destroyed her own reputation. She'd embarrassed the entire legal education system that had invested 5 years in training her. She thought she was graduating into a new life, I told Rick over lunch one afternoon. Instead, she graduated into a professional prison of her own making. The sentence was gossip, whispered in courthouse hallways and shared at bar association meetings. And unlike a legal sentence, this one had no appeal process and no time limit. In law, reputation is currency, and Amelia had spent hers as carelessly as a lottery winner blowing through their jackpot. Now she was professionally bankrupt, and no amount of legal education could fix that. You know what's funny about hitting rock bottom? It gives you a really solid foundation to build on. 6 months after watching my marriage explode in the most public way possible, I was sitting in a brand new office in downtown San Diego, staring at business cards that read Samuel Price, CEO, Langston Strategies, Divorce Preparation and Asset Protection. Turns out getting spectacularly betrayed by your spouse is excellent preparation for helping other people avoid the same fate. The idea came to me about 3 weeks after the court hearing, when I was getting my 4th phone call in 2 days from some guy who'd heard about my case and wanted advice on protecting himself during his own divorce. At first, I thought it was just morbid curiosity. People love a good revenge story, especially one with a clear winner and loser. But as the calls kept coming, I realized I was sitting on something valuable. Hard-won expertise in surviving spousal betrayal with your dignity and bank account intact. You should charge for this, James Herrera told me after I mentioned getting another consultation request. You've essentially developed a blueprint for protecting yourself in high-conflict divorces. That's worth money. He wasn't wrong. Between my IT background, my recent crash course in divorce law, and my newfound expertise in evidence gathering, I'd accidentally created a skill set that was in high demand. Apparently, there were a lot of people out there who suspected their spouses were planning to screw them over and wanted to be prepared when it happened. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I turned my personal disaster into a business opportunity. Langston Strategies started in my spare bedroom with a website, a business license, and a very clear mission statement. helping spouses protect their interests during marital dissolution through strategic planning, evidence gathering, and financial protection. It sounded professional and dignified, which was exactly the vibe I was going for. No need to advertise that the company was basically founded on pure spite and a desire to help other people avoid getting screwed over. My first official client was Thomas Brennan, a 43-year-old high school teacher whose wife had suddenly become very interested in girls' nights out and very uninterested in joint bank accounts. He came to my office looking like a man who knew bad news was coming but wasn't sure what to do about it. "I know she's cheating," he told me, sitting across from my desk with his hands clenched in his lap. "I just can't prove it, and I don't know how to protect myself when this all goes to hell." I spent the next 2 hours walking him through everything I'd learned the hard way. How to document financial assets without alerting a suspicious spouse. How to legally gather evidence of infidelity. How to work with divorce attorneys and private investigators. Most importantly, how to keep your mouth shut and your emotions in check while you're building your case. "The biggest mistake people make," I told him, "is confronting their spouse the moment they suspect something. All that does is give them time to hide assets, destroy evidence, and lawyer up. You want to gather everything you need first, then strike fast and hard when you're ready." Thomas left my office with a detailed action plan, a list of recommended professionals, and what he later described as the first hope I'd felt in months. 3 weeks later, he caught his wife and her personal trainer in a compromising position at a motel that he'd been monitoring based on her credit card statements. 6 months after that, he walked away from his divorce with his house, his pension, and his self-respect intact. "You didn't just help me protect my money," he wrote in a letter that I keep framed on my office wall. "You helped me remember my worth. You saved not just my finances, but my sanity." That letter convinced me I was onto something bigger than just a side business. Rebecca Martinez became my first employee, a sharp-eyed former paralegal who'd been through her own divorce nightmare and understood exactly what our clients were going through. She handled intake calls, managed client files, and had an uncanny ability to spot the warning signs of financial deception in bank statements and credit reports. "You can always tell when someone's planning an exit," she told me during one of our weekly case reviews. "The spending patterns change, the money starts moving in weird directions, and suddenly they're very interested in assets they never cared about before." Tony Marchetti came on board as our primary investigator, bringing 30 years of experience in catching cheating spouses and hiding assets. James Herrera became our preferred legal referral, though we worked with several divorce attorneys depending on the client's needs and budget. The business model was simple but effective. Clients came to us when they suspected their marriage was in trouble, but before they were ready to file for divorce. We helped them document their assets, gather evidence of misconduct, and develop a strategy for protecting themselves during the inevitable legal proceedings. We weren't marriage counselors, we were divorce preparation specialists. Think of us as financial and legal bodyguards. I tell potential clients, "We can't save your marriage, but we can make sure you don't get destroyed when it ends." Word of mouth was our best advertising. Satisfied clients told their friends, who told their friends, who eventually found themselves sitting in my office explaining why they thought their spouse was planning to leave them. Divorce attorneys started referring clients who needed help with evidence gathering. Even a few therapists began sending us people who were dealing with suspected infidelity but weren't ready for counseling. The cases varied, but the patterns were remarkably consistent. The stay-at-home mom whose husband suddenly became secretive about his business finances. The successful executive whose wife started talking about finding herself while secretly consulting with divorce attorneys. The small business owner whose partner was slowly draining their joint accounts while planning an exit strategy. Each case taught me something new about the psychology of betrayal and the mechanics of marital deception. I learned to recognize the warning signs that most people missed or chose to ignore. The subtle changes in spending patterns that indicated hidden accounts. The communication behaviors that suggested emotional or physical infidelity. The legal maneuvers that cheating spouses use to try to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. "You've become like a divorce whisperer," Rebecca laughed during one particularly busy week when we'd taken on 5 new cases. "People come in here panicked and confused, and you somehow make sense of their chaos." It wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition combined with hard-won experience. I'd been through the worst-case scenario and come out ahead, which gave me credibility that no amount of academic training could provide. When I told clients that I understood what they were going through, they believed me because I'd been exactly where they were. The business grew steadily over the first year. We moved from my spare bedroom to a small office downtown, then to a larger space when we needed room for Rebecca's expanding case files and Tony's surveillance equipment. Our client base included teachers, engineers, doctors, small business owners, and even a few lawyers who were smart enough to recognize that they needed help outside their area of expertise. The irony, I told James over drinks one evening, is that Amelia's betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to my career. I never would have discovered this if she hadn't tried to screw me over. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, he replied. She thought she was destroying your life, but she actually gave you a new purpose. By the end of the first year, Langston Strategies had helped over 100 clients protect themselves during divorce proceedings. Our success rate was impressive. Most of our clients managed to keep their houses, their savings, and their dignity intact. More importantly, they walked away from their marriages feeling like they'd been heard, supported, and treated fairly. I'd started the business to channel my anger into something productive, but it had become something much more meaningful than revenge. It had become a mission to help people protect themselves when the people they trusted most decided to destroy them. And every morning when I walked into that office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose that came from somewhere deeper than just paying bills or meeting expectations. That I wasn't just running a business. I was building something that mattered. 6 months later, I'm sitting at my corner table at Maria's Cafe on the cliffs of La Jolla, watching the morning sun turn the Pacific Ocean into liquid gold while I read emails from clients whose lives I've helped save. The coffee is strong, the ocean breeze carries the smell of salt and possibility, and for the first time in years, I actually know who I am when I look in the mirror. This has become my morning routine. Coffee with Maria, who always saves me the table by the window because she says I'm her most reliable customer, emails from grateful clients, and a few minutes of just breathing in the fact that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. It's a far cry from the frantic mornings of my marriage, when I'd gulp coffee while running around getting ready for another day of working overtime to fund someone else's dreams. The man I was 6 months ago seems like a stranger now, measuring his worth by his wife's achievements, believing that love meant endless sacrifice without question, convinced that being a good husband meant disappearing into someone else's ambitions. That guy was so busy building Amelia's foundation that he forgot to check whether she was actually planning to include him in the structure. This morning's email batch includes a note from Sarah Chun, a software engineer whose husband had been slowly draining their joint accounts while telling her he was investing in cryptocurrency. We'd helped her document the transfers, freeze the accounts, and discover that his investments were actually funding his girlfriend's startup business. Sarah's divorce finalized last week, and she kept her house, her retirement savings, and her stock options. Sam, her email reads, I wanted you to know that I got the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. My ex used to tell me I wasn't ambitious enough, that I'd never advance without his guidance and connections. Turns out I just needed him out of the way so I could succeed on my own terms. Thank you for helping me remember that I was complete before he came along, and I'm still complete now that he's gone. Then there's an update from Marcus Rodriguez, a small business owner whose wife had been systematically stealing from their company accounts while planning her exit. We'd helped him install monitoring software that caught her in the act and provided evidence that saved his business and his livelihood. 6 months ago, I thought I was going to lose everything I'd worked 20 years to build, Marcus writes. Today, my business is thriving, my kids are happy, and I'm dating someone who actually appreciates what I've accomplished instead of trying to tear it down. You didn't just save my finances, you saved my future. These emails have become my favorite part of the morning, better than any newspaper or social media feed. Each one represents someone who refused to be destroyed by betrayal, someone who chose to fight back intelligently instead of just accepting their fate. They remind me why I built Langston Strategies and why I get up every morning excited about the work ahead. My phone buzzes with a text from Rebecca. New client consultation at 10 a.m. Doctor whose husband is suddenly very interested in their investment accounts. Sounds familiar. I smile and finish my coffee. Another person who suspects they're being set up for destruction. Another chance to level the playing field before the real battle begins. As I walk back to my car, I can't help thinking about how different this all could have been. If Amelia had been smarter about her deception, if she'd been more careful with her digital footprints, if she hadn't been quite so arrogant about her plan, she might have succeeded in taking me for everything I was worth. I'd be the one struggling to rebuild my life while she and Gavin enjoyed the fruits of my 28 years of labor. Instead, I'm the one who emerged stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than I'd ever been in my marriage. I'm running a business that matters, helping people protect themselves from exactly the kind of betrayal I survived. My bank account is healthy, my reputation is solid, and my conscience is clear. Amelia, on the other hand, is apparently working as a contract attorney for small firms that can't afford to be too picky about their employees' reputations. According to Serena's latest update, she's living in a studio apartment in Hillcrest, driving a 10-year-old Honda, and still trying to rebuild her professional credibility. Gavin transferred to a law school in Arizona, presumably to escape the reputation damage he'd inflicted on himself here in San Diego. That I don't take pleasure in their struggles. Well, maybe a little pleasure. I'm only human. But mostly, I just feel grateful that their betrayal led me to this life instead of destroying me. They thought they were writing my ending, but they were actually writing my beginning. The drive back to the office takes me through Mission Hills, past the house where I spent 28 years thinking I was building a shared future. The new owners have painted it a different color and redone the landscaping, erasing the last visual traces of my marriage. It looks good, actually, brighter and more welcoming than it ever did when I lived there. I don't miss it, which surprised me at first. I thought I'd drive by and feel nostalgic or sad about all the memories contained in those walls. Instead, I feel relieved. That house represented a version of myself that was fundamentally incomplete, a man who needed someone else's dreams to give his life meaning. The office is already busy when I arrive. Rebecca is on the phone with a potential client, walking them through our services with the patience and understanding that makes her so good at this job. Tony is reviewing surveillance photos from a case involving a cheating spouse who thinks they're being clever about their hotel meetings. James is in the conference room with one of our clients, preparing for a divorce hearing where our evidence is going to demolish the opposing party's case. This is what victory looks like. Not revenge, though there was definitely some satisfaction in watching Amelia's plan backfire so spectacularly, but purpose. Work that matters. People who depend on you for the right reasons. Success that you've earned through your own intelligence and effort, not borrowed from someone else's achievements. My 10 o'clock consultation turns out to be Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cardiologist whose investment banker husband has suddenly become very secretive about their portfolio performance. She sits across from my desk with the same expression I remember from my own face 6 months ago, the look of someone who knows bad news is coming but doesn't know how to prepare for it. I think he's been moving money around, she tells me, her voice tight with the kind of control that comes from years of delivering difficult news to patients' families. Our financial advisor won't return my calls, and David keeps telling me not to worry about investments because that's his area of expertise. I spend the next hour walking her through the same process I've used with dozens of clients, explaining how to document assets, gather evidence, and protect herself legally. But more than that, I help her understand that suspecting betrayal doesn't make her paranoid or vindictive, it makes her smart. The hardest part, I tell her as our meeting winds down, isn't dealing with the betrayal itself. It's learning to trust your instincts again after someone you loved spent months or years convincing you that your perceptions were wrong. She nods, and I can see some of the tension leave her shoulders. I keep thinking I'm overreacting, that I'm being unfair to him. Dr. Walsh, in your medical practice, when you see symptoms that suggest a serious condition, do you ignore them because you don't want to upset the patient? Or do you run tests to confirm or rule out your suspicions? I run tests. Exactly. That's all we're doing here. Running tests to confirm or rule out your suspicions about your marriage. If you're wrong, you'll have peace of mind and a better understanding of your finances. If you're right, you'll be prepared to protect yourself. She leaves my office with a detailed action plan and the phone numbers of our trusted professionals. In 3 weeks, she'll probably be back with evidence that confirms her worst fears. But she'll also be ready to handle it like the strong, intelligent woman she is, instead of the victim her husband thinks she'll be. That's what I've learned in the past 6 months. Graduation isn't about getting a diploma or reaching some predetermined milestone. Real graduation is about learning who you are when everything you thought you knew about your life turns out to be wrong. Amelia got her law degree, but I got something more valuable. I graduated from being someone who lived through other people's dreams into someone who builds his own reality. And unlike her diploma, that's something nobody can ever take away from me.